Are you looking for a way to objectively understand how good your hearing aid is? Then you're going to want to check out this clip from the Dr. Cliff Show. Hey guys, welcome back to the Dr. Cliff Show. I'm Cliff Olson, Doctor of Audiology and founder of Applied Hearing Solutions in Phoenix, Arizona. And I am joined today by a very special guest from HearAdvisor.com, Dr. Steve Taddei. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Cliff. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you came all the way out here from Chicago. My understanding is that Chicago is much colder than it is here in Arizona right now.
A little bit. Fortunately, this week, though, it was warmer. So even though I'm not there, at least they're enjoying it a little bit.
Right on. Well, you're keeping my parents good company out there because they still live there in Illinois. But the reason we wanted to have you come out here is to really talk about this HearAdvisor.com project that you're working on with a couple of your colleagues. But can you give me kind of a background about where you came from and how you actually got to this point?
Absolutely. So I've always been into music and audio engineering and the creative arts. So way back before getting so invested in ears, I was in bands and I performed as a guitarist, a vocalist a little bit. That led to me going to college for audio production, working with bands again, recording, editing, and naturally there's this discussion at Columbia College where I went to undergrad about hearing conservation. You know, our society right now, we tend to have a increased risk of noise-induced or sound-induced hearing loss just because we have very busy lives. We have phones in our pocket, which when you connect to an earbud, they can get to 100 decibels plus. And it's just a natural discussion then for musicians as well, who are put in these environments again and again and again. So towards the end of my undergrad degree, I reached out to one of my professors. His name's Benj Cantors, and he's done a lot of work with hearing conservation as well. And he kind of pivoted me over and made me aware of hearing sciences. And so right after college, I went to Northern Illinois University and I worked on my doctorate in audiology. I graduated and I started working in a nonprofit in Rockford, Illinois. I saw a range of patients. I worked a lot with veterans doing compensation and pension evaluations, which was very rewarding. And one thing that I guess I could say was kind of missing was the creative side of the original audio arts. So I slowly have kind of been transitioning back into more of like a teaching role. And over the past, since graduating, I've taught more and more at Rock Valley College, some other schools, and it's lots of fun. But within this journey from kind of clinic to maybe a little bit more teaching, I came across Dr. Abram Bailey, who runs Hearing Tracker, and I know you're familiar with him.
Yep. We go back decent ways. I mean, I've only been in this profession for like 8 years, but I remember even as a student looking at Hearing Tracker to get information for myself to become a better student of audiology. So
there you go. And he's a great guy, and we had a similar interest with wanting to look at products a little bit more objectively and maybe offer some like product reviews in a slightly different way than what a lot of websites were offering out there. And one of the first things that we did was we looked at earplugs. So again, with hearing conservation, and musicians' earplugs are supposed to reduce sound levels equally from bass, middle, and treble.
And the reason is because you want the music to still sound natural, just at a softer level, right?
Absolutely. What a lot of people will do is they'll take those industrial roly-foamy plugs, they'll put them in, they'll attenuate far too much of the high frequencies, things won't sound natural, you won't be able to communicate with someone, and then they'll take them out, and of course the war is lost.
The damage happens, yeah exactly, yeah.
So we looked at musicians' earplugs. We started kind of a miniature version of what we have now as HearAdvisor, with it was kind of a janky mannequin at this point, or binaural microphones. It was more for headphone calibration, but we made it work. We had a speaker array or line of speakers. We made some recordings of those earplugs, offered them online, had some plots of the sound reduction that they offer, and that kind of spurred this project that we have now as HearAdvisor, working with Abram Bailey, and then there's also Dr. Andy Sabin, who is a hearing scientist.
So when was that actually the initial testing? When did that start? What year would that have been?
That had to have actually been early 2022,
okay.
I believe, when we were doing earplugs. and then it just kind of shifted over from there to hearing technologies.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about Dr. Abram Bailey. So Abram, I know him pretty well because we've worked on several projects together and things like that. We've had a lot of conversations over the years. I consider him a friend at this point, which is why I always get excited for any project that he ends up working on. But he went to Vanderbilt University. He worked in clinic for a while, but then he really ended up purchasing, I believe, Hearing Tracker, and has really grown that to what it is right now, which is an incredible asset for individuals who have hearing loss from a knowledge perspective. It also, I think that the newsletter that he sends out for professionals is one of my favorite things, because I'm able to stay up to speed with things that are going on inside of the industry. So that's kind of like what his main project is. And then I believe that Andy Sabin was one of the key developers of the Bose technology. Is that correct?
He was, and it was originally, if I'm correct, called Ear Machine. And he developed this app-based system that allowed you to basically cycle through some common hearing losses. And I think they did a little study showing that it was very accurate, or pretty accurate, in being able to fit and come close to what a provider might do in clinic. And through that, he ended up working with Bose and developing some of the products that they have now.
Yep, and they ended up getting their de novo approval. I would say it's, I think, the first quote-unquote over-the-counter hearing aid that got that approval, which was very impressive, even before they had the over-the-counter hearing aid guidelines come into play. And then a lot of people think that the Bose hearing aids just went away, but that's not the case. That technology has actually been transitioned over to Lexie. And so when you look at like the Lexie B1s and the Lexie B2s, and now officially the Lexie B2 Plus devices, which I should be getting tomorrow, which I'm pretty excited about, that technology still lives on inside of the Lexie brand. So it's not like that stuff went away. Like, I think a lot of people were saying, oh, the Bose hearing aids no longer exist, but they still exist.
Very true, yes.
So it's a nice contribution by Dr. Andy Sabin with that technology. So you decided, like, all three of you all have your own skill sets inside of HearAdvisor.com. So can you kind of explain the role of everyone and what they do with HearAdvisor?
Absolutely. So we can start with Dr. Abram Bailey and Hearing Tracker, and he obviously has worked very hard to culminate this community and just foster this community of individuals with hearing loss, as well as providers, just providing information and offering honest, unbiased reviews and information. So what he's been able to lend is a very strong understanding of the industry and kind of the gears behind it, the technologies, how they've grown over time, and I would say also how consumers and providers respond and use these technologies, which has been very helpful in doing that. And I might not be doing him justice, but the list just goes on and on with Dr. Abram. Dr. Andy Sabin, he is our scientific advisor, so he is the one who really understands the acoustics, the psychoacoustics, what is capable within our current kind of scope of science, and he has really helped us make what I would say is the best possible metrics given our circumstances that have the most pertinence to the average person wearing hearing aids.
Now, is it true that you turned your entire basement into a testing lab for HearAdvisor?
Not yet. There's still room for a wind tunnel, so I'm expecting.
That would be awesome.
I know it's a joke, but really it's kind of a passive hope that in a couple of years. But yeah, so when we set out to kind of start working on HearAdvisor, we're just kind of three guys doing this as a passion project, and one way to get this done was to just use a bunch of empty space I had in my house. So having a background in audio engineering and a little bit in acoustics, it's my kind of passion, love, just acoustics and room acoustics. And so yeah, I actually started building a sound treated room in the basement that is near anechoic. So if there's anyone who is really into the acoustic side, the reverberation time of this space now is actually 0.06 seconds around speech ranges, around the speech frequencies.
And so what would that compare to a true anechoic chamber? Because I went to the NAL labs in Australia, and then the one they have at Starkey up in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. Like, how does that compare to that with an anechoic chamber?
So like a true anechoic chamber, For at least our purposes of testing hearing aids, there's a very, very minimal difference between them.
Nice.
In our room, really the only area that reflects sound other than the speakers and the mannequin we have in it would be the floor, and even that has some mild acoustic treatment in the form of a carpet on it. So it actually is quite respectable, and we've had some manufacturers come over and they've acknowledged that it is kind of state of the art and comparable to what they have in their testing facilities, which is feather in my cap, and some of my family helped me build it, so it was.
That's very cool. Of course, we're going to show some of that footage of your actual space that you've developed there. Very impressive, by the way. Definitely a huge project even to get that developed and procuring all of the equipment that you would need. I think that you had actually said that a used Kemar head was like $5,000 just to get the Kemar head.
Yeah, the mannequin alone, which the specific model is Kemar, comes from a company, Gras. We have the head and torso, and on the used market, we were able to find another audiology team that was trying to get rid of it for around $5,000, and then we updated it to have 2 ears.
Nice.
Or 2 systems.
So you invested some additional money into getting that thing up to where you can really do binaural testing effectively and all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Very cool. So now you had touched base a little bit earlier on, you really wanted to develop something that you could objectively test all of these other devices that are out on the market, right? I mean, hearing aid manufacturers, prescription hearing aid manufacturers, they will do their own in-house testing. It's not a third-party thing, so it's like, can you really trust that? I mean, you like to think that you could trust that information, but the OTC market really opened up to, like, you know, pretty much anyone can come and play in that sandbox, and there's really no good objective information out there. Mm-hmm. So was it more of the inspiration of the prescription side of the devices? Was it the OT side, or was it really just a combination of both?
It was, I would say, definitely more the OTC side, because in the past you had wonderful providers who were hopefully then vetting the products, testing all of them, and using the ones that they sought or they found to be the best, relying on what manufacturers did for research within academia. But with the OTC ruling in August of 2022, like you said, now we have this flooding of new products on the market. And whether it's a $100 device that you might find on Amazon, or even that prescription level device that's being sold along with provider services for thousands of dollars, they will almost always have the same claims. And it comes down to 2 main points, and it is they make speech clear, and then they help in background noise.
Right. And
that's because that's where most people want help with their hearing technologies. So if you imagine that disparity in cost, $100 to thousands of dollars, same recommendations, or at least the same statements about being able to help in speech and noise, speech and quiet, what are consumers supposed to do? So the real impetus behind this project was that, to provide an independent, meaningful and easy to understand way to compare these devices.
So let's talk a little bit about the things that you look for, that you guys have identified, at least from a base standpoint of what is important to test and what can you test, and maybe what are things that you cannot test with these devices.
So we're definitely focused on sound quality aspects. There are far more than that with fit, with like battery life, app features, and just ease of use. But we decided very early on that we wanted to maybe take the most difficult route, maybe then also the most worthy, which is just to see if we can quantify sound quality. So we've narrowed it down to 5 different aspects, and these are based on what are commonly referenced as being most important. So there's speech in quiet or moderately loud environments. There's speech performance in loud environments, and the difference between those two is roughly below 70 dBA average sound levels or above 70 dB levels. So that's between speech and quiet and speech and loud. We take a look at own voice boominess. So you know, if you plug up your ear, your voice takes on this barely sound quality, which is undesirable for most people. We look at feedback control. So you know, if you brush your hair, is the device going to squeal on you? And then last and kind of least, at least from what people or what our studies have looked at, or our surveys, is audio for streamed music quality.
So now, not all of the devices that you will test will have capabilities maybe for streaming, or most of them should have all of the other capabilities with the devices. So, but you guys essentially take these 5 different variables of sound quality, and you guys come up with what is called a HearAdvisor score, correct?
The SoundScore.
The SoundScore. The HearAdvisor SoundScore is what you guys come up with that. And so then, how is each of the component weighted? Is it all like all of them contribute to 1 point on this scale?
This is a great question, and it goes deep very quickly. So what I will say is we have a video online that will probably describe it more succinctly than I will be able to do now. We also have a white paper that really goes into the weeds if you are into the science side.
So if you're a nerd.
If you're
yes, okay. So which, we've been called nerds before.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that, for sure.
But yeah, so it gets complicated. The best way I'll be able to describe it now, we have 5 metrics: speech and quiet, speech performance and quiet, speech performance and noise, own voice sound quality, feedback control, and then streamed music quality. So think of those 5. We also split that twice though for each device. So we have what's called our initial fit, and this approximates what most people experience when they get a hearing aid. If it's an OTC device, they take it out of the box, follow the user manual, follow the app-based instructions, and then they kind of go from there. If it's a prescription device, and this is unfortunately still something that we see in the field where real ear measurements and other objective measures aren't followed, and you rely solely on manufacturer recommended settings for gain, that is also within this first fit category for prescription devices.
Okay.
So the other side of this is what I always like to say, I put on my audiology hat and I use our mannequin, our KEMAR mannequin, and we're able to analyze the sound that enters his ears with the devices on in real time. So I tune them just like you would do in a clinic with real ear measurements, with various forms like real ear insertion gain, real ear occluded insertion gain, and basically I go through everything that the device has to offer with presets, app-based settings to make the device as clinically appropriate for one specific hearing loss that we test as possible. So that's following an NAL, NL2 prescription actually, and we'll take a look at 55 dB, 65 dB, and 75 dB SPL. Again, just like you would do in clinic.
Yeah, and just to clarify for anyone who might not understand the concept of real ear measurement, essentially that's the way that we would in clinic verify that the hearing aid is meeting their prescriptive target for the level of hearing loss that they have, and then going back to at different input levels. So soft level speech needs more amplification typically than average level speech, and then loud level speech needs less amplification than average and soft. So doing something that we call compression, not necessarily to get into the weeds too much on that, on the technical side, but really it's the only way that we as clinicians know in the clinic if we are programming a hearing aid correctly that would optimize the potential performance of the patient.
Absolutely. And the goal is generally speech intelligibility, right? Improving a person's ability to communicate in quiet and noise depending on their individual life.
And there's a whole slew of research that proves that when people have real ear measurement done with their hearing aids, that it actually helps them achieve a better outcome, not just in quiet, but in background noise as well. And so essentially what you guys are doing is you're like, okay, straight up out of the box, either with an over-the-counter hearing aid that does not come with any professional care anyway, typically, and a prescription hearing aid that is right out of the box just with your audiogram entered in, and then the first fit settings, which have not been verified inside of your ear canal. What do you get result-wise with that? And then I think the question that everyone would ask is, okay, is the tuned fit, where you've optimized it with all of your knowledge and know-how and customizability and all of that, does it actually give you improved performance?
Fortunately,
on average, I guess.
No, and this, so this is one of those interesting things we didn't know initially. That was one of the thoughts. We're going to go through all this work and do all this testing, and maybe we find out that all those adjustments that we follow in the professional world and best practices have shown, maybe it doesn't show a difference, but it has. Absolutely, going from the initial fit and then tuning it for, I think, almost every device, it shows an improvement. And the only caveat there is some devices, based on the way that you are capable of programming them, they're the same.
Okay.
Initial and tuned are the same.
So that's interesting. So can you think of, let's think of circumstances that you've run into, maybe with different devices, and I'm not going to ask you to name names. If people want to know, they can go to HearAdvisor.com to find this stuff out. But does a device stand out in your mind that was like, wow, that was a huge improvement going from the initial settings of the device to a tuned fit? And then how big of a difference is that?
Yeah, so there are a few. One of them that comes to mind is Lucid Engage.
Okay.
OTC device. It has different presets where you can choose, I think, like a mild, moderate, or bass boost. And that's pretty much all we would do for our initial fit. And it didn't score all that well, though it did provide a decent amount of amplification around 3,000 hertz and above, and those are the speech frequencies that we need, or those are the frequencies most important to make speech clear. Lucid has something called Lucid Shape.
Okay.
And this is accessible within the app, and this is basically like a 7-band equalizer. And after tuning it, I was able to get, I believe, within 3 decibels of our NAL, NL2 targets for the mild to moderate hearing loss that we use while testing.
Excellent. So over-the-counter hearing aids are intended for a mild to moderate hearing loss, and there are, obviously varying degrees of the hearing losses within mild to moderate. But when you say NAL, NL2 prescription, you mean that based on the person's hearing loss, there's a calculation done to determine how much amplification they would need throughout the entire frequency range. And you're saying that you were able to get within plus or minus 3 decibels using the app to control that.
Absolutely. And one caveat for 65 dB SPL, like a presentation of speech.
Yep.
So not necessarily at 55, 65, 75, but at least for that main like conversational speech level.
So you saw an incredible jump in terms of performance from an initial fit to tune fit using Lucid. Can you think of devices that you're like, man, the initial fit and tune fit there's really not that much improvement between doing a tune fit?
The one that always stands out to me is Lexie B2, which we mentioned earlier. And the reason why I think there's no difference is the app is very minimalist. But I think it's quite elegant in being minimalist. And obviously I'm a little biased because I work with Dr. Andy Sabin, and I very much so respect his knowledge. But the app has 2 controls. It has a world volume, and then it has like a treble bass adjustment. So unlike Lucid, where you have different set programs or presets, and then a 7-band EQ, because there are these 2 adjustments, I think the initial fit controlling just one of them was close enough to the tune fitting that, again, there was just not enough adjustment, and the initial fit settings were actually they were respectable.
Okay. And so then I think that there's probably like a third category, which would be, hearing aid manufacturers, whether it's OTC. I mean, obviously OTC is still pretty new, so we're not seeing like a whole lot of new generation technology that it comes to kind of, so to speak, surpass the old generation technology. But we do see it pretty regularly with prescription level devices. Some manufacturers will release a new prescription platform every year. And so you guys have been doing this long enough to have tested a couple of different generation upgrades over the course of that time. What are you typically seeing? Like, I mean, if something scores a perfect score initially, like, it's hard to go higher than that, but even if they score lower than a perfect score, are you seeing like generational improvements consistently?
So a little bit of yes and a little bit of no. And one of the main reasons why it might be a no comes back to that initial fit. Now, there is quite a bit of research out there. Gus Mueller, I know he has a lot of articles and just kind of pages on like Audiology Online that I've read, showing that manufacturers' first fit are regularly considerably less than what research would suggest is needed to optimize speech. And that's not an oversight. I think it's done intentionally, because if it's a lower gain, it's going to be more comfortable for people initially. We know with hearing loss, you tend to have it progressively over a long period of time, so your brain acclimatizes to hearing in this very kind of dark world, if we want to use a visual analogy. And then with hearing aids, all of a sudden you're giving your brain all of this information, and it can definitely kind of set you in shock. I know I'm sure you've had countless patients who, when they hear a newspaper for the first time or their toilet flush, it just sends them up a wall, because their brain is not used to hearing those sounds, and it sounds foreign, but in reality it's normal.
Yeah.
So I think manufacturers kind of count on having levels lower to just help people out in the beginning maybe, or maybe even to reduce like return rates if further adjustments aren't made.
With the hope that if they're working with a professional that they would gradually increase them.
Absolutely.
One of the actually interesting pieces of research that Gus Mueller talks about, because I'm very close with Gus, we talk fairly regularly, not super regularly, but and I've been to a number of his talks, and he was mentioning that people, when they are under or below their prescription, they will not adjust their own volume up to get closer to their prescription. But if they are overfit, meaning they're over amplified relative to what their prescription would be, they actually tune themselves down to being very close to their prescriptive targets. But it's kind of like, well, shoot, if no one's going to be there to know and actually boost you up to where you need to go, you'll never actually get there, and then you're limiting your performance. So it's kind of it's an interesting aspect. I'm interested actually to know that if you've tested devices that have significantly overprescribed the amount of amplification.
I've not had any that overprescribe, but some of the lower cost OTC devices, for example, some that I've purchased directly from Amazon and even Walmart, the minimum gain setting sometimes provided 10 decibels or more gain at like 1,000 hertz than prescription. And so like literally I've turned the volume down all the way, and at 1,000 hertz there's still this like mountain of gain.
So you're still over amplified at the lowest volume setting in certain frequencies. And then probably, I'm guessing, significantly under amplified in some of the higher frequencies that would typically give you back perception of clarity.
Absolutely.
And they do this. So like, I actually saw a video that you guys had done maybe even a year ago at this, but maybe not a year, maybe 6 months ago, where you actually did sound quality tests on devices, and you actually put the audio recordings that you recorded through Kemar, I believe, to let people experience what the sound quality was. And people were actually reporting that they preferred the sound quality from some of these devices that just had this mid-frequency boost.
Yes, and this was a shock for us, and certainly for me, because when I listen to these sound files, knowing I suppose what quote-unquote good is, at least from a speech intelligibility standpoint, it is a night or day difference that the prescription device in this roundup is better. But what a lot of people were noting is exactly what you said, that they preferred the lower cost Amazon sold products. And what this really highlighted for us is that there's a difference. Well, we knew this, but it highlighted that we need to be very careful in how we describe and recommend the use of these sound files, that there's a difference between sound quality and what's needed for speech intelligibility. Because when it comes to sound quality, like for music, we like bass. Like, if you've ever gone to the movie theaters, it's very obvious that we like bass because the whole room rattles. And that is not at all what is needed for speech intelligibility, at least if you have a high frequency.
Arguably, it's the opposite of what you need. Like if you end up amplifying the low frequencies too much, you actually get an upward spread of masking that drowns out the clarity that you could get, even if your high frequencies were up appropriately. So it's a little concerning, because like in these recordings, and this is potentially one of my like concerns about putting audio samples out there for people to hear, is that they listen to this, $50 amplifier and like, man, that sounds really good compared to this $1,000 prescription hearing aid, right?
Yeah, and this is definitely something that we've thought about a lot, and I think it just comes down to making sure that we're being very careful in our description of these sound files, and like I said, how they should be used. And there are lots of caveats with what we're doing. We're using one hearing loss. We're using what's called an N3 configuration, which comes from some research by a group, the lead author is Bisgard, and they're standard audiograms. So for those who might be interested, it's actually a 30 dB HL loss in the lower frequencies. And then at 1,000 hertz, it's a 40 dB HL loss, and then it gradually steps down at 5 dB increments until at 6K, you're at a 65 dB HL loss. So we chose this one audiogram, which is kind of limiting because hearing loss is very considerably. But this one is a very common age-related configuration. And then also it should be at the boundaries of what OTC devices are supposed to be used to treat.
So there's a lot of variables that go into this, right? I mean, when I think of, I made a video like a year ago talking about how a 10-cent piece of rubber, the dome that you choose to use on the tip of your hearing aid, can make or break a $6,000 hearing aid, right? Not a $6,000 hearing aid, but a $6,000 pair of hearing aids typically at that price point. But like, how do you determine like which dome? Like, because a lot of these devices, every time I order a pair of OTC hearing aids or a company sends me a pair to review, it always comes with an open fit dome, like every single time.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. And we had, it just feels like endless month-long discussions in the beginning of how we can best approximate like what you described, what the average person would do for an initial fit. And we actually broke it down, and we have this decision tree that I follow every time I'm testing a device. And if it arrives with with whatever dome, that's what I use.
Okay.
That's the initial fit. If there's no device, if there's no dome on it, I will rely on whichever one is open. If the device relies on like an in-ear or on-ear hearing test and then offers a recommendation based on that, I will follow it. So it's very minimalist and kind of subjective, or relying on the manufacturer recommendation.
Okay.
It's when we switch over to that tuned condition that then
you can modify.
Then I modify it,
Okay.
and it generally will step up a little bit the occlusion to help produce things like feedback, and that's one of the things we didn't I didn't answer your question long before. We have initial, we have tuned, we have 5 metrics, and some of the devices might not have streaming, but across those 5 metrics, what we did is we reached out to roughly 100 providers and roughly 100 individuals with hearing loss, and we asked them to rank our 5 metrics for importance.
Okay.
So imagine you can guess what came out most important: speech and quiet and speech and noise. And then streaming music quality was the least important.
Least of them. Okay, so that gets weighted differently is what you're saying.
Absolutely. When we combine these numbers, the biggest factor is how it performs in speech. And then also between initial and tuned, we did a similar questionnaire to ultimately decide the weighting between initial and tuned, and it came out to be roughly 70-30, where the vast majority of people do not get real ear measurements performed. So our weightings and our scores, that SoundScore, focuses predominantly on the initial fitting and then speech performance. Again, it's about trying to estimate what most people will experience when they get these devices.
So since that segues nicely into what I've been thinking about with like the HearAdvisor SoundScore, there are OTC devices that are ranked higher than prescription devices, yet in my personal experience of both selling OTC hearing aids online, selling them in clinic with professional fitting, my return rate is over 50%, meaning over 50% of those individuals, even at a significantly lower price point, choose to return those hearing aids to get their money back, as opposed to less than a 2% return rate of prescription hearing aids that are substantially more expensive inside of the clinic. So it's hard for me to kind of like look at the SoundScore and be like, oh, that is the be-all end-all of the decision, for an individual trying to decide which device to go with. So how do you square that, right?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I love it. And what I will say is, we as a team, we do not posit that like our SoundScore and our metrics are perfect. It is kind of a living organism where we are continually leveraging the best the scientific community has to offer to provide the most meaningful information, the most helpful information, and that's ultimately our goal, to help people hear better. Our metrics, though, they really focus on sound quality. So they're not going to take into consideration things like how much control do you necessarily have within the software? Are there a true range of different domes that you can use? Can you go to a custom fit if needed? And so elements like that, or even like battery life, they're not considered in our SoundScore. It is just strictly on the overall sound quality performance.
So here's an interesting question that I have that I literally just did not think of until right now. The definition between sound quality and then hearing performance are different then.
They are. I'm kind of using them synonymously here, at least when we talk about how we analyze sound. So audio quality, as I'm describing, like now with HearAdvisor, it is more so linked with speech intelligibility benefits.
Okay.
At least for those first 2 metrics, right? But we do have that audio quality for streamed music, and that does shift a little bit, and that uses a slightly different metric that is more predictive of strictly sound quality.
Okay. So if that's the case, then one would essentially make because I'm very familiar with how consumers think now at this point, with having over 1,000 videos on the channel, getting interaction all the time from consumers. they don't always hear what you're telling them, right? And we talked about this actually at dinner last night. Like, the thing that bothers me the most about what I do is that I can actually say, here's what you need to get from this video, and then someone gets something completely different. I'm like, where did you get that from? You know? And it's actually led me to stop posting video content on devices that I see as being objectively and subjectively bad devices on my channel, because I know that it's going to lead to people purchasing products that are not right for them, and that are potentially even from scam companies, right? But I think that, like, the SoundScore is you can tell people till they're blue in the face that, like, that's not what we're saying with the SoundScore. You need to think of other variables, but they're going to look at the SoundScore and they're going to say, that got a 5.0. I want that device over this other device that got a 4.5. Right? I mean, is that well, are you guys worried about that?
So let me explain one thing, and thank you for kind of reminding me in that we have this scale of 1 to 5, and this is something that was brought up from some of the manufacturers, actually, with similar concerns that we might not be providing the most clear information. The specificity between these numbers, with basically a score of 4 or a score of 5, it's difficult to say really what the differences between that are. So our position is, if anything is receiving that Expert Choice Award, which is if you get a score of basically 4 or above, 5 being the top performing device, it is likely to help you with speech performance, again, if your hearing loss is similar to that N3. So it's not like if you purchase a device that is a 4.6 or a 4.3, that 4.6 is going to be leaps and bounds above the 4.3. And this is maybe something that we need to then consider if people are regularly noting and focusing more on kind of the micro differences between those scores. But the goal is, with the SoundScore, to simplify things again between tuning, the 5 different metrics, and then also we provided an expert choice badge to all devices that were within what was calculated to be like a just noticeable difference. So a JND. And for general audio purposes, it's around 3 decibels. And Dr. Andy did some interesting calculations to normalize that to our score, and it ended up being conveniently around 1 point. So in short, you can think of it as anything that's above 4 right now is a top performing device, and at least from a sound quality standpoint, is very, very similar with performance.
Very good. So, I think of this from the context of this really then is almost looking at the a prescription level device's capability with an over-the-counter level hearing loss, right? Like, we're not, and do you guys have plans on looking at a severe level hearing loss and which devices actually perform the best with that?
We would love to. We would absolutely love to include severe losses, profound losses. The difficulty is each device right now, we actually have 72 scenes that we record, and it can take somewhere between 2 hours to almost a full day to get recordings for one device with one hearing loss. So the difficulty is kind of just the bottleneck of time, where it would be great to test these other devices, because the reality is, if we were to say test hearing thresholds that are maybe closer to 60, 80 decibels across the board, these OTC devices, of course, would not be able to come close to the score of the prescription devices, but nor should they, because they're still over the counter and they're not meant to be fit. What the official saying is anyone with a perceived mild to moderate hearing loss.
Yeah, which could be a severe to profound.
Right, right. So there's so many caveats to all of these discussions, and like you mentioned, you can tell someone in clinic, and I remember being in school, and what we were constantly told is people remember 50% of what you tell them in clinic. So it's about simplifying things as much as possible, and then repeating things as much as possible, so hopefully they take home the most important messages. But
so I love the work that you guys are doing, by the way. I know I'm grilling you pretty hard about all these questions that keep popping in my head, because I know how difficult of a nut it is to crack that you guys are trying to do, because of all the variables that you have to take into consideration. And you have to try to whittle it down to what are the core things that we really need to answer about these devices. And I find it to be greatly appreciated, which is why I've started to include a lot of your scoring into my review videos of new products that have come out. I've even sent you devices. I'm like, hey, I need a score for this because I'm doing a video in a week, right? And I greatly appreciate that. Are there any devices that you're like, man, this is an objectively bad device that the company, the brand should actually pay the person to wear it because it's taking performance away?
There are a few. There are a few devices. Unfortunately, it's only a few
Thank
that
goodness.
we have tested that have actually shown, based on our models, and I'm happy to discuss those too, like how we're actually like predicting speech benefits, but that a few devices that have actually shown worse performance than wearing no device at all.
That is crazy.
It is mind-blowing, and again, these are the same devices that will use terms like hear speech clearly. Some of them go a little bit too far with saying, either hear like you're 20 again, or some other really outlandish claims like that. But a lot of the reasons why these devices will perform so bad is the frequency response, or the frequencies that they're able to amplify, is extremely limited. And there was a device, right now we're actually doing a roundup of the best-selling Walmart OTC devices. One of them that, from my standpoint, I was kind of hoping would be a better performance based on how it looked and the price and the overall kind of like physical feel of the devices, even if we don't report that.
Did it have brand recognition too?
Honestly, no. I'd never heard of the company before, but it looked good. It looked like a prescription device, so that has to mean something.
And when you think about people who are making purchasing decisions who might not be educated on the technology themselves, they would literally look at that same stuff that you just mentioned.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, that was the device that has scored the word. It set the bar really low for right now.
Yeah.
I
mean, like below a 1?
Below 0. So
yeah, that's right.
So
it'd have to be below 0.
Zero is, you can think of it as like the control. We have these realistic environments that we create, present it to our mannequin, we record through our mannequin's ears, so 0 corresponds to just normal
so like an N3 hearing loss, right?
It actually
would be 0.
Yes,
like no treatment, that level of hearing loss at 0, and it's getting below. And I actually, when I was in school, and I believe we were in school right around the same time, there was some research that came out. I can't remember who it was from, but they actually took the over-the-counter amplifier devices, back before over-the-counter was a thing, right? These just amplifiers that could be sold online and in stores and whatnot. And they actually went and like graded them based on the performance that they would give off. And they said, oh, you should, you're paying $5 for every like percentage point of improvement in speech intelligibility. And then there were other ones that were like, they should pay you $40 to buy these devices because they actually reduce your hearing performance. And that's basically what you're telling me, is that you're still finding devices like that.
Unfortunately, and it isn't necessarily that they're just cheap. We're not talking like these lower performing devices are $50, where you would assume that if, as a consumer, if you're spending $50, you get what you pay for. No, the one I mentioned is still a little. I think it's around $500 to $700, depending on the sale that's going on. Yeah.
No kidding. That is absolutely crazy. So, guys, buyer beware on a lot of that stuff. An excellent reason to go check out HearAdvisor.com to find out what the SoundScore is. And you guys just did not a rebrand. You did essentially a refresh of your website. So walk us through, like, what types of information can people expect to find on the website?
So yeah, with our new website, our goal was, again, to provide things as easy to digest as possible, even though what we're doing is really in the weeds with how scientific it is. You can find individual product pages, and within that you will get a sense of how that device ranks compared to not only other overall products, but how does it compare to other like OTC devices or other prescription devices. Something that we have on the page is we break down the 5 different metrics across initial. For tuned, we have different graphs like radar plots or spider plots, depending on what you want to call them, that hopefully make it a little bit easier to visualize, as opposed to just kind of Excel charts and things like that. For those people who do want to get into the weeds a little bit more, and even for providers who might have a patient come in and ask about the quality of an OTC device, for example, we are including some of the objective measures like real ear insertion gain, which is again very similar to the real ear measurements, and then the real ear occluded insertion gain. And we have those charts, and on those charts will show, or on those graphs will show the prescription. Like, what are the targets? What should you be doing based on what science says is best to optimize speech for that N3 hearing loss? And then we'll show the gain capabilities of that device for both the initial and the tune. So personally, that is something that I'm very excited to have on the new website, because again, it's a little bit more objective. And even if it's like, if you don't trust our SoundScore or whatever, if you're a little bit dubious because your hearing loss is different, that's fine. But here, look at the gain capabilities of this device. It's basically a low pass filter after 2000 hertz, so you can't expect to get any of that clarity back.
Yeah.
Something else that we have, which will hopefully, to your point of, do you want to mention certain devices that perform poorly because then you're lending some credence to them? We are now going to have also an overall ranking page, which shows you very much so like on columns and rows, all of the devices that we have tested, what are their scores for initial, for tuned, across those 5 different component sound quality metrics. And then for those who want to dig into their individual desires or just needs, you can filter out like OTC devices by price, by SoundScore. Did they win an expert choice badge, for example? So it really allows you to go in there a little bit more, compare them objectively, listen to the sound files. So hopefully, again, just you're a more informed consumer and or professional, because this is something that comes to my mind. I would routinely have people come to clinic and then bring in a newspaper cutout and say, how does this device perform? And I would always be very honest with them. I don't know. We don't talk about these devices in school. We don't get our hands on them, and it ends up being anecdotal at best. So this is honestly something that I would have wanted to see in clinic to at least pull up, and for counseling purposes, together, me with the patient, we could have learned and seen what some of the capabilities are, again, based on our testing protocol.
It absolutely, it would definitely save clinicians time, not just consumers, with hearing loss time. And I think of all the time that I spent doing my own testing when I'm doing reviews of over-the-counter devices, and I'm like, man, I'm 15 hours into this review of a product, and no one has this knowledge really unless you're willing to commit hours of time outside of seeing patients to do it. And if it wasn't for me having a YouTube channel where I'm actually able to generate extra revenue to cover the cost of my time to spend it on this, I wouldn't do it, and I wouldn't have the knowledge around it. Which kind of leads into a question of anytime that there's third-party testing, the intent of that really is to insert some objectivity and limit bias when it comes down to doing an evaluation of a particular product. But you guys have to make money somehow. You're not just doing this out of the kindness of your heart. Maybe you're doing it because you really want to know, but that can only take you so far. At some point, you have to make money on a project so you at least don't lose money doing it, which I would venture to say that for the first however long a time, you invested a considerable amount of capital in this before you guys ever generated any kind of revenue. So what's the business model around this?
Right, so this is a great question, and I always like to start this with saying all the information is available on HearAdvisor, and it's also kind of cycled over to Hearing Tracker as well. And there is no cost associated to individuals with hearing loss to go and browse and be on our website. There are currently no affiliate links, so you don't have to consider anything like that. Where we are making money, because you're right, eventually this is in a house, so we need to pay for that and some other things. But we do private lab evaluations. And this is not unique to us. There are other companies that will evaluate sound bars and cell phones and headphones, for example. So if a company is releasing a product or a next generation, or even if it is already on the market, we will test that for them, compare it to other devices, and then give them a thorough report of how that device performed, what are some things that they might be able to do to make that better. And this wasn't initially something that I don't recall us planning on doing, but a nice side effect of this, obviously it does get us money, but at the same time, if we can help products that are before they come to market to improve their first fit. So if we test them and following again our protocol, it shows that their initial fit, their presets are off from a traditional high frequency hearing loss, and we can offer them recommendations and they adjust their default settings. Hopefully that might raise the bar then, so we're not getting so many devices that are scoring negative, for example.
Yeah. Hopefully there's not a lot of those, like you said.
Hopefully.
Scoring negative. Yeah. But it is nice to try to raise the bar because they know that there's some level of objectivity out there.
Yeah, and hopefully it's not overreaching to say that, but I do feel like that's something that we could do, because a lot of these companies, they get their products, their chips overseas. So if we can get to one of those overseas companies who is licensing their bodies or selling the chips, for example, to multiple companies, that could have a rather big impact. Now, the other area where we're making money is through licensing of our badge. So we have our SoundScore, which hopefully simplifies all of our metrics. And then we assign that this 2023 Expert Choice Award, which is like, in our mind, our good housekeeping seal of approval. So even if you don't want the numbers, you see this badge, you know it's at least like minimum competency, which isn't quite right, but you can think of it like that. Again, it's available online, but if companies, if the winners or the awardees, if they want to use that in their marketing materials, or if they want to put it on the box or on their website, there is a licensing fee that we offer for that.
So we're now in 2024 as of the time of us doing this interview. So how does that badge get updated? Do you guys say like, okay, every August we're going to release a new badge, or like how does that work?
That's a great question. We're figuring that out. So right now we're on our version 1.0 metrics. And again, this is a learning experience for all of us. Science is constantly changing as well. We've had absolutely wonderful discussions with many of the manufacturers since we launched in January of last year. Some of them have come to visit us, offer recommendations on some things that we might do a little bit differently to make our metrics more accurate or more robust. So that's, I think, where we're sitting right now. We're trying to figure out what will version 2.0 look like. And once we get to version 2.0, and now that we've tested far more devices, we're somewhere in the ballpark of 60 or 70, then we'll likely look to releasing another badge.
Very cool. I love to hear that the industry is open to working with you guys and seeing how you do things, maybe providing some additional insights that you guys didn't think of, and you guys providing additional insights that they haven't thought of when it comes to evaluating their products objectively. Have you had any pushback?
You know, we have, and even from that example I gave you of like earplugs, way back before HearAdvisor was HearAdvisor, it was kind of like a sign that we might run into some issues because one of the devices we evaluated that wasn't, I would say it is a very dishonest product, saying that it's flat, it offers that uniform sound reduction like we talked about, and it doesn't at all. This earplug actually approximates a noise-induced hearing loss, so it should be used, I always think that it should be used as like a counseling tool for musicians. Like, is this how you want to hear? No? Well, then get good earplugs.
Oh gosh,
but anyway,
that's crazy. And it's intended for musicians to use when they're either playing music or a fan who's listening to a band play.
Right, concert goers. So this device, we were very fair in describing it. It's never about trying to trash a company, it's about trying to help consumers. But even still, that company did reach out and like threatened me personally, like lawsuit and things like that, because at that time there wasn't HearAdvisor.
Yeah.
But similarly, you know, we have had some discussions with manufacturers that haven't been as productive, and they've asked us to remove our information, stop testing their products, and you know, respectfully, we've let them know that we're beholden to the consumer, not the manufacturer, and our goal is to provide that objective information. We're using the best science has to offer. We're having regular conversations with not just manufacturers, but other groups that are working with like machine learning to try and make things better. And that's what all version 2.0 is about. So as of right now, like our plans are, if a device is tested, we're going to show it, and hopefully we never have to remove products, because from our perspective, that is dishonest to consumers who are looking for information.
Yeah, you know, if there's people who don't like what you're doing, it means that you're probably doing something right. That's something that I learned early on. I've had my fair share of cease and desist letters sent to me that I have to forward on to my lawyers to make sure that that gets taken care of. And typically, unless they're willing to, file a lawsuit, like nothing ever comes of it, fortunately, but wouldn't put it past some people to, essentially try to put the little guy under, in a pretty tough spot, so to speak.
Right. But honestly, look, we admit that this is not perfect. Again, it's something that's developing and growing, and we have had great discussions, and we are open to that. We're open to feedback, recommendations on new models, things that we hadn't thought of, like you said, because hearing loss is so there's so many facets to hearing loss, so why wouldn't the technologies and the means of testing be similar? So we welcome that feedback, and that's why we are completely transparent with the metrics that we're using. We have the white paper out there. It's not proprietary. People can go and recreate what we're doing. So the goal, again, is to just be independent and provide meaningful information.
Yeah, well, that's very cool. I think that, again, I applaud what you three guys are doing. I think that if anybody can do what you're intending to do, it's probably the combination of you three to do it. I would provide little to no value in that entire process, but but I get to enjoy it. Me being a self-proclaimed nerd, like I think all of us would say that we are to some degree, at least when it comes to hearing. I think it's very very nice what you guys are doing for individuals with hearing loss, which is, one of the main reasons that I started my YouTube channel was to not cater to manufacturers, not cater to hearing care professionals, but was to cater to individuals with hearing loss so they can make better informed decisions. So anything that we can do collectively to help inform people better, I think is a good thing, ultimately. So, Steve, thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there anything else that you feel like individuals with hearing loss should know when it comes to HearAdvisor and what you guys are doing right now or where you intend on taking it?
Something that comes to mind is really early on in this discussion, you mentioned the difference between the initial and then the tuned fittings, and almost like what percentage of people would have a tuned fitting for an OTC device, which it's generally pretty small. I have not seen, at least on my bubble online, of many audiologists like yourself who work with OTC devices. I know there's a group called tunedcare.com, and they're brand agnostic, and it's like an online platform for getting help from hearing care providers without there being like sales or anything else associated with it. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with it, but there's some people who would like that. But the honest answer is, no, it's very unlikely that many people will have the ability to have like real ear measurements performed with like a Lexie B2, for example. But that doesn't mean it's something that we shouldn't shoot for. In the future of audiology and students, I think it's something that we should embrace more so. Why not? We have the technology. There's no getting rid of over-the-counter devices now. So if we embrace them, I think just in general, people should have the choice. If they want to purchase a lower cost device, that's fine, but they should still have the ability to go to a provider and have real ear measurements performed. So we would still like to at least provide that information. So
and we talked about this. It's a very good point. We talked about this essentially before, where as long as people are making informed decisions about which route they think is best for them, I'm okay with it. What I don't like is when people are making uninformed decisions based on incomplete information or false information, to that matter, which we all know, like marketing is a very interesting thing. People will say things, and you alluded to it already, which is, certain companies will say things about their product that objectively are not possible given what those devices are capable of, right?
Sure.
And I don't like that. But if they are choosing to go with a particular brand of device, as long as they're using accurate information and they're informed about it, I'm okay with whatever they do. But I think to your point is that, can we really attribute a tuned score and use that as the overall like decision maker for someone if they're never actually going to get it tuned? So and I don't think that people will, not all people anyway, will look at it from that lens. I think there'll be a lot of people who say, oh my gosh, this thing scored a 5.0 and it's an over-the-counter device, and the only way that it scored that was because it was tuned properly, and they never take it to a hearing care professional to actually have that done. So that score of 5.0 isn't necessarily apples to apples.
That's a great point, and what I would say is that's why we have it weighted between the initial and the tuned. It's actually a little bit more than 70-30. It's close to 80-20, where 80% of the score is coming from that out of the box. So there are some prescription devices even where their initial fit, as we've discussed, is beneath targets, but once we tune it, it's beautiful. But because of that initial fit being so low, they don't end up getting quite as high of a score. So that goes to show just how much the weighting does influence it. It is predominantly on the initial fit because that is what the vast majority of people will experience in the real world.
It would be very interesting to have the Dr. Cliff score of like if you go to a professional who always follows best practices, if like a Hearing Up Network member, for instance, and get one of these devices, like here's what the score would be if you go to one of these professionals.
That would be fantastic, and that reminds me, like, something in this is, You know, the methods that we have right now, using a mannequin, recreating realistic environments, like it's very objective, it's very scientific, and it has to be that way so it's repeatable. But something that we are looking into is like university affiliations, working with other groups, so that we can get real people listening to our sound files and then scoring them so that we can relate that back to our SoundScore to just validate it and moving forward do more things like that to, again, just raise the validity, the overall robustness or accuracy of our scores.
Well, honestly, I'm surprised that you took time out of your schedule to come out here, because it sounds like you have like endless amount of hours of work to do when you're spending that much time per device testing all of these different sounds through the devices. So I greatly appreciate you coming out. Just so you know, everybody who comes out here to the Dr. Cliff Show, they get a gift.
Oh, really?
Yes, they do. So this right here, my friend, is for you. It is the official Dr. Cliff Show mug.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cliff. It
So
was
a little token of my appreciation from you coming all the way out here to the miserable weather in Arizona compared to Illinois this time of year. Oh wait, that's right. It's like 70 degrees outside right now.
Mm-hmm.
But greatly appreciated nonetheless. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The pleasure was all mine.
Excellent. Guys, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you hit that like button. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel with notifications turned on, go ahead and do that as well. And we will see you next time.